So we've obviously called this conversation, How Do I Begin? So I'm wondering, when you're starting a mediation, when you're preparing it, what are you considering when thinking about how you're going to begin?
So it's thinking about the person you're going to be speaking to, and it's engaging with them and hopefully building up trust at an early stage with them, and thinking about really where do they want to get to and how can you help them to move to that place where they want to get to.
And do you have a sort of go-to opening question for the start of a mediation?
So I suppose once we actually get into the mediation, it would be something like, well, where do you want to get to today?
Mm-hmm.
And it's getting people to visualize and imagine, well, where do they actually want to get to by the end of the day, or sooner if we can get it done sooner, of course.
Always good. Um, I think of the three C's when I'm thinking of how to navigate a sensitive conversation: uh, curiosity, compassion, and connection. Um, and so I thought it would be quite good to talk about each of those individually, probably starting with connection, because you're talking about establishing that at the start of the mediation. And that's obviously important to build trust. So, how do you go about that?
So really, really important. So actually often when I begin the mediation, it's not the first time I've met the party.
Mm-hmm.
These days, post-pandemic, it's very typical to have a Zoom meeting with the party and their advisor. And so they've seen you, they've met you, albeit online, whether it's going to be an online mediation or in person. So at least you've got a sense of them and they've got a sense of you. And then coming to the mediation, I think there's no such thing as small talk. Small talk's important. It's about hearing the other person speak so that you can then, to some extent, mirror them. You can gauge where they're at. So a classic opener might be something like, how's your morning so far? I would never say, how are you feeling? Because you might get far
Open a
more.
can of worms at
But,
that point. Yeah.
how's your morning so far? So just trying to find something you can engage with that person in, and that will build empathy. Because if you go immediately into talking about the case and the dispute, that might be too quick.
And obviously, in the mediation, what you're thinking about is trying to develop that connection between the people on different sides who may well have never met before. But it is important for the mediator to establish it as well, and to do it in an even-handed way, so that the other person's not looking and thinking, they're very matey with them.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, as a mediator, you're entirely neutral. In most of my mediations, people have at some point met or crossed paths before, but sometimes you might get the new finance director who's come in to give a view on this and they weren't engaged in the dispute and the facts that had happened. But in terms of getting someone to read the other room, that's so important at a mediation, because if they can understand where the other party's coming from, so getting them to be in that other party's shoes can be really important. They may resist that. They may think, I don't care about them. This is all about me. I'm not interested in where are they coming from. But actually saying to people, during this mediation, I may at some point ask you some probing or challenging questions. And some of those may be things like, how do you think the other party is feeling about this? How are they thinking? And if you predicate those questions by labeling them and saying, look, I promised you you're going to get some challenging questions here. Here's one for you. What do you think they're thinking in the other room? Where are they coming from? And that gets the person then to build a degree of some sort of connection with the other room.
And reflection as well,
Yes,
because
yes.
they've mostly been thinking about their own position until this point.
Absolutely. Yes, entirely.
So the questioning, curiosity, the second of the three C's. When I did my training, one of the trainers said, be Yorkshire nosy, which I thought was a good way of putting it. And sometimes you have to remind yourself to, I find anyway, because sometimes there's something that is niggling. It needs to be asked. And even as the mediator, it can feel a little bit sensitive. How do you approach difficult questions?
Well, yes, you have to be brave and you have to not be afraid to be asking those questions. Again, you may predicate it with, can I just ask you something that might be a little bit difficult but could be helpful? And to pause and to allow the person then to answer. And in my experience, sometimes when people are answering a difficult question, they will pause. And it's that moment, that golden moment, when you then know that if you allow them then to speak, they're going to tell you something that's going to be super important, because often the golden nugget emerges when someone's paused because they're thinking, should I say this or shouldn't I? And that comes back then to the empathy and the connection. If they feel comfortable with you as a mediator, they then will hopefully divulge the full answer to your question.
I've seen you in action. I know you have guts when it comes to this, because, I mean, as you say, it does take bravery, and I've seen you doing that.
Yes, I mean, sometimes it may even be something like, are you sure you've got all the right parties in the other room? Could it be that there's an extra party that actually could be a potential defendant, for example?
And that, I mean, that takes us down another route, which we can maybe talk about later, but always remembering that the mediation isn't necessarily the end of it. It's ideal if it can be that mediation that's established for that day, but there's always the possibility for conversations on another day, perhaps bringing in people who aren't there, depending on where it goes.
Potentially, yes. I mean, I think the statistics are that of the 93% that settle altogether, there's something like 15% that don't settle on the day but settle soon after. And so, yes, there are ongoing conversations. But I think the other thing in that piece that you're talking about there, Joanna, is also, what if the mediation doesn't settle and people have answered those questions very openly and then it goes to court? Well, what they've said is without prejudice, but many advisors will say, yeah, but the cat is slightly out the bag, because people have said that. Once somebody said something, it can't be forgotten, and it's been said, and the people will remember that the other party said, yes, okay, we do accept, perhaps we're a little bit weak on that aspect of our defence. And so there's always an element of caution, but it's about building the trust. And it may be that what the party and the advisor tells the mediator in one room, it won't go further, and very often it won't, but it's there as a piece of information to help that party navigate the negotiation. If the mediator knows, okay, you don't think that's your best point, thanks for sharing it with me, we can then steer the negotiation to address that.
Yeah, so you're mindful then of where questions might lead.
Yes, and in fact, I think something that mediators are very comfortable about is asking questions where they don't know what the answers will be. And this is a very different mindset often to particularly barristers who, when they're cross-examining, they simply wouldn't ask a question unless they pretty much knew what the answer was likely to be. And so you have a different dynamic at the mediation. And I think as a mediator, it's important to be reflective on what questions to ask, because you certainly don't want to ask a question that could potentially professionally embarrass the solicitor or could give rise to some kind of regulatory issue that may have absolutely nothing to do with the dispute. So you don't want to be flushing out all kinds of other things that frankly are better left on one side.
How forceful are you if you're asking something and the person is resisting answering, and is it always clear if they're resisting answering because they know and they don't want to say, or they really don't know, or maybe the question isn't being framed in a way that they're getting?
So if you feel that the person isn't understanding the question, I would reframe it, but keep it simple. The best questions are the simple ones. And so to say it in a slightly different way, but still a simple way, is best. If still no answer isn't really given, I would move on, because I think the fact that the person hasn't answered speaks to itself. Sometimes silence and what people don't say can be as important as what they actually do say.
Let's talk about compassion, because obviously mediation is the opposite of an adversarial dynamic, which is where disputes can get stuck. So how important is compassion in the dynamic of a mediation?
Very important. I think the relationship in one room, there needs to be compassion there. People need to feel comfortable about making a decision on the day. How do they feel comfortable? If they feel confident, if they feel supported by the team and the mediator, that they can make a good decision, then they are more likely to make a good decision. The last thing you want is a party to say, I don't think the mediator gets me. I don't think the mediator understands me. It may be that the mediator, in asking some of the challenging questions we've just been talking about, may make the person feel a little bit out of their comfort zone, but it's important that the party realizes that this is being done for a reason, to help them think about something differently, perhaps even to think about, dare I mention it, how a judge might
Mm.
see something if it were to go to trial. So it's about challenging people's beliefs, but in a compassionate way.
And so do you spell that out then, if it does seem like they're feeling under pressure, almost being questioned in a way that's making them feel uncomfortable?
Oh, yes. I would be saying, look, of course, I hope that a deal that's going to be good enough for everybody can be found today, but we can't lose sight of the fact that if it isn't, and if something isn't found in the next few days, you're going to be back in your litigation process, and ultimately that will go to court. And my job is to help you think about what might that look like. I'm not going to want to scare you, but my job is to help you do a bit of a risk assessment on that.
Mm-hmm. When I was doing my training, one of my trainers said uh, it's sometimes best in a mediation when the mediator effectively disappears, because it means that the two sides can engage directly. How often do you find that happening, and how can you try to actually make that happen?
So in civil and commercial disputes, to be honest with you, that's quite rare. Occasionally, I might get the key decision makers together in the room with me there, and if that conversation goes well, that would be one that's direct. But I think kind of situation you're referring to more here is in, for example, a workplace mediation or possibly a family business mediation where people may spend more time together, and there really you are facilitating the conversation. And if actually the parties at the end of the day say, I don't really know what the mediator did, but somehow this has worked, then that's a success, because a good mediation, people shouldn't really be super conscious of the mediator in those kinds of disputes.
And as you say, I mean, there is a different kind of process really for civil and commercial versus workplace and family and relationship mediations, where the latter are very much everyone is together and it's all very open.
Yes.
Whereas with the others, it's the separate meetings and the confidentiality in each rooms where some stuff gets passed in between. In civil and commercial, what's your sense of when to bring people together and how much they should be together?
So that's always the classic question, are we going to have a joint open session? And I always discuss that beforehand. If we're on a pre-mediation Zoom, then I'll be talking to people about it. I will always encourage, and as a mediator, if people are willing to talk to each other, I would never say no, unless someone's going to be super emotional and say so much that it's going to inflame the other party at that session. But in terms of if people are reluctant, sometimes I'll talk to them about, well, if you and your advisor are there and the others are there as well, this is your opportunity actually to speak to the other party directly. And it's an opportunity for the other party to see your advisor in action and to hear what they've actually got to say. And so if you're not comfortable about saying anything, that's fine. Leave it to the advisors and me. I'll begin with the opening session, and then the opening statement, and then each of the advisors will speak. And it can just be really good if you as a party are willing to say, I'm here in good faith with a view to see if a settlement can be found today. And that's really positive. People will actually look at each other in the eyes, and it can, that back on our compassion point, that can start to build some empathy.
Seeing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also framing it as something that is forward looking, where the dispute until that point is, when it's in the context of the more adversarial environment, would be building the evidence and more backward looking.
Exactly. I mean, mediation's all about looking forward. Litigation's about the past. And a big part about mediation and finding a solution is how will things look for you if this matter settles?
So that's a really important part for the mediator, to help people transition from that mindset of I'm defending myself, the other person has to hear me, has to agree with me, to opening up and also listening. So how does the mediator do that?
So by asking questions, back again on the questions, by saying to people, what would you do tomorrow if this matter had all closed? And they may say, oh, I'd have an amazing bonfire, or I'd be shredding all the documents, or I'd be going off and out for the day. And you say, right. And it's getting people to think, how will the world look like if all this has gone away? In addition to, if they're a claimant, it may well be that they'll have a sizable sum of money coming through. What would you be doing with that? You might be putting it back into your business, or there may be other personal things that they might do.
Some people think it's a soft option. What do you say to that?
Not at all. I think, yes, some people may say it's a sign of weakness to go to mediation. Not at all. I mean, in some ways, the day is a bit pressured. Let's be honest about it. People are coming for a day, and they've got a day, if that's the session length, in which to try to find a solution. So you have to work hard. It's not for the faint-hearted, but you're going to be working hard in a civil and commercial situation within the confines of a private room where everything's confidential. You've got your team with you. You may have a supporter who's coming along to assist, and other advisors may be available on the telephone. And so in many ways you can get your full team primed, ready to find a deal.
And it's an environment where everybody obviously is there with the client's best interests in mind, albeit coming from different perspectives, different positions. How do you, as the mediator, support the client in having the space to actually think and to be able to reflect in that context for what is best for them?
So for advisors, it's an unusual day because they're no longer centre stage. The day of the mediation is the party's day. And I think it's very helpful to have the advisors supporting the client in their decision, reminding them of their legal position, but at the same time encouraging advisors to take a little bit more of a step back and to realise that actually for the party, the decision they make will be as a result of a jigsaw puzzle. It's the time, resource to go to court. It's what are their legal rights. It's how many sleepless nights can they face? Do they actually want to retire? Are there grandchildren on the way that they want to spend time with? All these other things. And so the legal advice is one piece of the picture, but it's not the whole picture. And so encouraging advisors to support, remind people of advice, but also to appreciate that at the end of the day, it's the client's dispute and everybody's got their price for peace. And so actually sometimes it's almost about physically where everybody sits. It may be that actually how people are seated at the beginning of the mediation, the advisors are sort of closest to where the mediator will sit and the parties are sort of rather protected further away. And sometimes it can be just to say, shall we just all have a little change around here? Or as the mediator, just conveniently finding a spare chair that may be next to the party and coming over and sitting with them, rather like you and I are talking, then you can engage more with that person.
I spoke to a barrister who said, and you can really empathise with this position, how he finds it really frustrating sometimes when a mediation settles, thinking all of that hard work that has gone into preparing all the documentation, preparing for court, knowing that they've got a really strong argument to fight and keep on fighting. He finds that a little bit difficult sometimes to accept at the end of a mediation. But I guess, all of the work that has been done is never wasted because everything has been, it'll come to mediation at the moment when it is right for something to come to mediation.
Absolutely. All that work has probably prompted the mediation. As a litigation solicitor said to me the other day, people will come to mediation when, they've been really sort of fed up with the whole process. So having it all put in detail is important. And at the end of the day, a happy client is going to be one that will then go away, tell others about the success story. They may come back to a corporate department then to engage the corporate solicitors of that firm who the litigation solicitor has been with to go forward with a new deal, because they're then in a place where they can springboard to set up something new. So mediation can make a difference in a day.
And that day can be quite long and, as you said, intense. If you're in a situation where it feels like it's going circular, people aren't maybe thinking as clearly as they perhaps need to be because they've been focusing on detail for so long. What do you do? What's your approach then?
So sometimes it's another cup of tea and more biscuits. They say chocolate helps people to make up their minds. So making sure that people's personal needs are met. It could be suggesting that they take a walk, literally, with their advisor, and occasionally I've walked with them. And actually, if you can walk in step with the person, you will actually find that you're then in greater harmony and compassion and empathy. So
do you make sure that happens if you're at different heights?
Wearing the right shoes can be helpful.
Okay.
But actually, if somebody is walking alongside somebody, they may say more. It's a bit like those conversations in the car that you may have with people. People will sometimes say more than when it's sort of so much direct face to face. What else can you do? Just getting people to perhaps look at something from a different angle. We've mentioned, where is the other party coming from? And perhaps just saying, well, is there anything else? Let's just have a moment where we just let our ideas flow. Let's not attribute any idea to anybody and think that it's definitely going to go out of this room straight away. Let's just have a general free-for-all on this.
That's really interesting, actually, isn't it? Taking the pressure off, because that's the point of mediation, where it is confidential. It is an environment where people can be quite creative in what they're thinking, and it's not going to go beyond the mediation. And knowing that you don't, because you've voiced something, doesn't mean you actually have to go with it, is important.
Yes, and sometimes somebody at that point may say, maybe actually what's really disturbing them is XYZ situation. And, I kind of get it. Maybe I wasn't the best on that moment. And then at that, the mediator could say, would you be willing to share that thought? Would you be willing to apologize for that? And of course, if they say no, fine, you drop it. Sometimes someone will say, yeah, actually, I could, recognize that. And then if that goes through into the other room, they may say, that's actually good of them. Well, yeah, actually, it does take two to tango. Maybe on that situation as well, we weren't 100% squeaky right and clean, and therefore we might give a similar kind of recognition, apology, call it what you may, and then that can unlock the discussion.
And it's a different way of achieving then what is driving people often when they are heading for court. They want the acknowledgement. They want to feel like they've been seen and heard, and vindication as well. So that can actually be delivered through the mediation, albeit in a very different way.
Very much so, because quite often people want to be told they're right.
Yeah.
And if the mediation to some extent can give people an opportunity to say how they feel, be listened to, and even at some level the other person may say, there are one or two points here where you have got a point, you are right, then perhaps they may think, I've been listened to, I've been heard, and emotionally I'm ready to make this deal and reach a settlement.
You're obviously really passionate about mediation, and it's the same here. So what is it that drives you with mediation?
So same reason as I wanted to become a solicitor, wanted to help people. What I love about mediation is you can make a difference in a day, and you can make you can help people significantly and companies in one day, and that's the beauty of it.
Thank you. It's been good to talk about it.
Lovely, thank you too.